This video is presented by newmetalworker.com. One of the more frustrating things in a shop is to find a bolt that's exactly what you need, except that it's a little bit too long. Let's say that the nut is where I need it to be when this bolt is tightened down in the assembly. The project doesn't have room for all this extra thread, so we're going to have to shorten this bolt up. For this bolt to be safe, we have to have a thread or two sticking through the other side, so this is what I want it to look like when we're done shortening it. I have the nut in the right position on the bolt, so we're going to mark the cut a couple of threads out from that to give ourselves a little room. Because this bolt is big enough to handle easily, I'm going to run the nut all the way down to the shank and leave it on when we do the cut. And we'll show you why we do that a little bit later. Since the end of this thread is going to be scrap anyway, I can use that to clamp this in the vise very tightly. This isn't a high-tech cut or anything, so a hacksaw will work just fine. But this is me you're dealing with, and I got a power tool for this, so I'm going to use that. The main things we want to do with this cut is cut it in the right place, and keep it as straight as we can so we don't have to grind too much later on. I found that I get a lot better cut with a tool like this if I just let it do its work and don't force it. We've got a pretty good tail left over from the cuts. We're going to take this right to the grinder and clean that up. There's very little metal that has to be removed here, so we use a very light pressure and just drag it on the wheel essentially. I'm just holding it straight and turning it slowly. That'll flatten out the end of the cut. And that's pretty good. I'm holding the bolt at about a 45-degree angle and just lightly dragging the edge on the wheel as I turn it. Here again we have very little material to take off, so applying any kind of force just makes this dangerous. I just want to create a little bit of an angle that'll help the nut get started. Now we can unscrew the nut and bring it up to the threads and see how tight it is. If there is resistance, I use a wrench and just turn it back and forth like a half turn at a time until it loosens up. Just running the nut back and forth like that will help clean up the threads that might be slightly distorted. This bolt came out pretty good right off of the grinder. What little resistance I can feel in the nut is coming from this thread here that's kind of run together from the grinder. I can turn this nut on by hand pretty easily, but we're going to go ahead and sweeten up the threads because oftentimes it's a lot tighter than this. It's important to keep this thread running at the same angle it is now. I'm using the corner of a triangular file to lightly clean up that thread just a little bit. We don't have to remove much material at all. Most people tend to file way too much the first time or two they do this. And I'll try spinning the nut on, and it goes right on. That little bit of filing was all that it needed. And that's all there is to it. We now have a bolt that's a perfect size for our needs. And if we did it right, when it's installed, it'll have a thread or two sticking out of the nut like this.